Yeah, thank you, Marianne. Thanks, guys, for being here. And definitely I want to thank Marianne as well as everyone else here who's possible. I've already had the opportunity to meet a bunch of folks. It's been really great, and looking forward to speak about something. So I'm going to share with you today some work in progress. It's from my paper on model municipalities and environmental governance. And it's a paper that I'm working on with two co-authors, Cecilia Viana, who just completed her PhD at the University of Brasilia, and Fabiano Toni, who is a professor at the University of Brasilia and alumnus of Singapore. So, I'm going to slip into the first person a bit as I'm talking about this work. I'm going to be sharing with you some of my new ideas about the project, and I'm going to be looking forward to your feedback. What we're trying to do with this paper is to explicate the political dimension of what Popola and colleagues have called the pervasive transition of the Amazon land use system. As most of you probably know, the Brazilian Amazon since the 1970s has lost an area of forest larger than France, with deforestation driven initially by small farmer migration, extractive logging and mining, as well as extensive cattle ranching. Since the 1980s, industrial ranching and soy cultivation have expanded dramatically, accelerating annual deforestation rates to the point where in 2004, nearly, not a script, no, but I mean, you can see 2004, 28,000 square kilometers of forest have lost. Since 2004, however, deforestation rates have declined over 70%, reaching their lowest point in 2012. And since then, deforestation rates have crept up again, but they remain at historically low levels. These deforestation reductions have been driven significantly by new environmental governance measures, including the creation of new protected areas, soy and cattle industry moratoria on commercialization of commodities from newly deforested areas, and also on enhanced enforcement of the federal forest code. I should explain for those not familiar, the Brazilian Forest Code prohibits clearing along bodies of water and on steep slopes and hilltops, which are called permanent preservation areas, and it generally requires landowners in the Amazon to maintain 80% of their property area under natural vegetation as a legal reserve, deforesting no more than 20% of the properties for other uses. So compliance with the Forest Code has historically been weak, but after 2004, enforcement was intensified. I've argued elsewhere that these various governance measures have been advanced by a land-sparing complex of government, NGOs, and corporate actors who have combined policies aimed at territorial constriction along with agricultural intensification in a project for economic development and state building through environmental regulation. So what we're focusing on in this project is the political geography of this abstract construct of governance. How is governance constituted through specific political processes situated in space and time? Let me spend just a moment then on some theoretical framing. Epstead and colleagues discuss environmental regulation of the Amazon as a process of frontier governance. The frontier is a powerful concept in the literature of geography and political ecology. It denotes the edge of a system and its own contact. And there are at least two different frontiers to distinguish in the Amazon: the deforestation frontier and what Brandstrom has called the neoliberal agriculture frontier of industrial soy and cattle production, which roughly correspond here because of these the boundaries of extensive or extractive and intensive or productive systems or economies. The photos in this presentation are ones that I've taken, also is otherwise noted here. For the sake of this discussion, we can place theoretical understandings of frontier development under two large tenets: political economy and economic geography. And I'm not going to go into detail on these theories, but I'll outline that economic geography approaches include land rent theory coming out of the Bantunan tradition. Walker and Bowman, a couple notable publications here. Also also new institutional economics, which focuses on factors such as the land tenure regime and supply chain configurations. Wendy Jepson and Rachel Garrett, a couple examples of publications there. Whereas political economy approaches include structuralist accounts, already heard of Steve Bunker, as well as more post-structuralist perspectives, such as Schmick and Wood's Contested Frontiers and Browder and Godfrey's Rainforest Cities. Coming from a political economy perspective, I want to offer a complement to economic geography approaches and to expand political economic theorizing. So I suggest that the Amazon has been undergoing a systemic political economic transformation. And understanding that transformation requires attention to both economic and political dimensions of change, which are co-constituted, but they're not necessarily spatially congruent. In other words, a regionally coherent regime of green agro-industry has been emerging in the Amazon, but the political and economic dimensions of that regime develop through distinct, though interconnected geographies. So whereas the municipality of Sorriso is the epicenter of agro-industry in north-central Mato Grosso, the nearby municipality of Rio Verde is the epicenter of environmental governance. Talking about frontier governance implies that there is some pre-existing apolitical frontier that is out there to be governed. Rather, there are distinct forms of governance, extractive versus intensive zones. And what we should really be talking about is the evolution of a governance frontier. So in this project, investigate the development of this governance frontier through a focus on Amazonian municipalities that have become models of environmental governance. And I'll give a few notes here about the research design. Why the municipal approach? Brazil is a federation with three levels: the nation, the states, and municipalities or counties. Municipalities can be quite small in the most populous areas, but in the Amazon, they can become quite large. The municipality of São Félix is larger than the state of South Carolina. In 2008, the Brazilian federal government created a priority list of municipalities for combating deforestation in the Amazon. The list singled out over 40 high deforestation municipalities for enhanced environmental monitoring and enforcement, and it stipulated criteria for exiting this list, which included reductions in deforestation and originally a review of private land types. In brief, the municipal level has been a key focus for environmental governance in Brazil over the past decade. Two municipalities in particular have become prominent models of green municipal governance. Lucas do Rio Verde in Mato Grosso. There's an article about them here. They won a national prize for their green governance on the left. And Paragominas in Lucas, the municipality was instrumental to the creation of CAC, the Rural Environmental Registry, which facilitates landowner compliance with forest code. In Paragominas, a project helped it become the first municipality to exit the government's priority list. And it became the first member of what's called the list of municipalities with deforestation monitored and under control. So the governance models developed in these municipalities have been widely promoted and replicated. CAC became a national requirement under the revised Federal Forest Code passed in 2012, and Paragominas inspired a statewide green municipalities program that now includes 3/4 of the municipalities in the state. These models of municipal governance do not emerge independently of each other. They are connected not least by the involvement of the Nature Conservancy, a major international environmental NGO in both Lucas and Paragominas. To illuminate these connections and the processes of policy evolution and transfer, we use a follow the policy approach inspired by Ike Theodore. This method links global ethnography and critical policy studies under the idea that policy designs are complex social constructions developing through multi-sided webs of experimentation, emulation, and evolution. By following the policy, we can explore the spatiality and the social processes of the expanding green governance frontier. So we're following the evolution of municipal environmental governance through the tropical forest conservation programs of the Nature Conservancy, informed by an organizational ethnography that I conducted within the program's organization. So this approach takes us from the municipality of Santarém at the mouth of the Tapajós River in Pará, to Lucas do Rio Verde in Mato Grosso, to Paragominas in northeastern Pará, and lastly to São Félix do Xingu on the Xingu River in southeastern Pará. Our research involved original fieldwork in all 4 of these municipalities, comprising interviews with farmers and ranchers, government officials, and NGO staff, as well as participant observation at events, NGO activities, and the collection of documentary materials. We made only brief field visits to Santarém, that was Cecilia's work in 2011, and to Lucas do Rio Verde, where I went in April 2014. We rely more on secondary accounts for those municipalities, and we conducted more extensive original fieldwork in Paragominas, where Cecilia was in 2011 and also 2012, and in São Félix, where I was working in 2014, including on that visit with Marianne and team. And I'm going to give you a brief account of the policy evolution across these municipalities, and then I'm going to share with you some of the findings that we'd like to forward. The Nature Conservancy began to work on forest code compliance with property owners in Santarém in the early 2000s. By the end of the 1990s, TNC had become well established in Brazil through its work on protected areas. The TNC staff felt that Brazilian protected areas had become more consolidated and they wanted to focus on development measures. Soy and beef were clear drivers of deforestation at this time. And in 2003, multinational commodities trader Cargill opened this soy port on the Amazon River in Santarém, which primarily exported soy grown in Mato Grosso, but also drove the expansion of soy farming in the area around the port in Santarém. On a yearly vacation to the area, a TNC manager, as I just out here shown, saw land being cleared for soy farming in the Santarém area. And he called the TNC director of Minnesota, where Cargill is headquartered. And that TNC director of Minnesota put him in touch with Cargill's sustainability department. A Cargill rep came down to visit the area with the TNC manager, who warned him that Cargill would likely be targeted by environmental activists at the station. So TNC and Cargill began working together to set up a monitoring system to ensure that local soy purchases were not driving deforestation. And this effort became TNC's Responsible Soy Project. There was a debate at this point between pursuing zero deforestation and zero illegal deforestation. So forest clearing could still be allowed under zero illegal deforestation as long as the property was in compliance with forest code protections. Cargill initially decided to pursue zero illegal deforestation, that is compliance with forest code. In 2006, however, Greenpeace launched a campaign targeting Cargill for driving deforestation through its soy purchases. And in response, Cargill assembled other major soy traders along with environmental NGOs to agree to a soy moratorium against the purchase or trade of soy grown in areas in the Amazon biome deforested after July 2006. TNC's existing monitoring efforts with Cargill provided a template for implementing the soy moratorium. Brandstrom and colleagues discussed so-called soft governance in the Amazon, which they would consider this sort of action between corporations and NGOs, as opposed to a state-mandated government. And they divide soft governance into compliance and market exclusion, two kind of forms or categories. So while the soy moratorium is discussed as a form of market exclusion, it's interesting to note that the collaboration between Cargill and TNC actually began as a compliance effort. At about the same time as the soy moratorium came into effect, the mayor of Lucas do Rio Verde in Mato Grosso, who was himself the owner of an important regional agricultural trading company, approached TNC. He was aware of TNC's compliance work with soy farmers, and he forged a partnership with TNC to develop a municipal level property registration compliance project called Lucas Legal, or Legal Lucas, in the municipality. Mato Grosso State, since 2000, had a property registry called the System for Environmental Licensing of Rural Properties, or SLAPR. It doesn't São Félix that manage environmental compliance and licensing of activities such as forest care. The Lucas project aimed to register all rural properties in the municipality with this system, and it involved the state environmental agency with the understanding that farmers who had illegally deforested but were seeking compliance would not be fined. That understanding did not hold with the federal environmental agency, IBAMA, and in September 2008, IBAMA fined 15 property owners in Lucas. This action triggered intense lobbying by municipal leaders, TNC, and the state environmental agency, culminating in a state law that officially created PAC, the Rural Environmental Register, breaking environmental licensing into stages and granting farmers a grace period after registration to bring themselves into compliance without fines. The principle of CAR was that rural landowners should voluntarily register their properties and declare their productive and historic areas in accordance with the Forest Code. After the creation of PAC, many more producers in Lucas completed the state registration model, and then the state government sought to scale up the Lucas project model. So Lucas now becomes a model of environmental governance. As these quotations indicate, the TNC manager says, Lucas is our laboratory. Everything that is new, we start out in Lucas. And the municipal environment official who was involved in the project says, TNC's projects today are basically copies of Lucas. So Lucas is the model. 2008 also marked the creation of the federal government's priority list, driving a municipalization of environmental governance projects throughout the region. Paragominas in northeastern Pará was one of the municipalities placed on the priority list that year. I should say that Lucas and Santarém have never been on the priority list. Paragominas had been developing as a hub of intensified ranching and grain production during the 2000s, and after the creation of the soy moratorium, elite landowners in Paragominas had met with TNC representatives in 2007 to discuss replicating the Lucas model in the municipality. Heavy enforcement action after the creation of the priority list hamstrung the rural economy in Paragominas. In response, the mayor convened local organizations to commit to a municipal pact for zero deforestation. This pact garnered 51 signatories, including government bodies, rural producers, syndicates, and community associations. The mayor also negotiated with the federal government to loosen the property registration requirements of the priority list. He used the example of Lucas to convince the ministry to accept CAR as a form of property registration instead of a full revision of land titles. So under the rubric of what was called the Green Municipality Project in Paragominas, the municipal government and the landowning elite partnered with the Nature Conservancy and Amazon, a Brazilian environmental NGO, in order to complete CAR and to monitor deforestation in the municipality. This is a photo that CISA took in Paragominas. Shows a good-looking pasture, and it looks like possibly row crop cultivation and a background there. Hard to tell, or it could be.
But it also shows the area of permanent preservation.
It does, yes, along the water courses. Here you can see, and possibly legally reserved areas. So in 2010, Paragominas became the first municipality to exit the priority list, and the Lucas model of municipality-wide CAR registration now became the Paragominas model of CAR and municipal anti-deforestation pacts. And this is heavily promoted by government, NGOs, and Paragominas elites. And in 2011, the Pará state government launched a Green Municipalities program based on this Paragominas model of local pacts and CAR. So a TNC manager asserts that Paragominas was an advance in the methodology for development of this policy model. And in the words of Mario Lucio Costa, who is the president of the Ranchers Syndicate, the Ranchers Union in Paragominas, he says no one should be different from Paragominas. And Costa said this on a TNC-sponsored visit to São Félix in 2012. After the creation of the priority list, TNC had launched a number of green municipality projects focused on park registration, but the organization invested especially heavily in São Félix, where it began working in 2009 in the hopes of developing a jurisdictional grant project for project emissions for deforestation. São Félix is a massive municipality of 84,000 square kilometers and an active frontier zone where deforestation rates in the early 2000s averaged over 1,000 kilometers square. So I'm speaking very briefly about São Félix here, but Marianne and I have an article coming out with Jeff Polly and Paragominas in the journal Peasant Studies that discusses the long-term evolution of the São Félix frontier. Thanks to Paragominas, completion of PAC became a requirement for exiting the priority list, and the federal government began to require municipalities to promulgate anti-deforestation pacts in order to extend licensing deadlines for uses. So while the Pact of Paragominas had been largely an elite agreement, in São Félix, the development of the municipal pact was led by a commission involving over 20 entities, which organized meetings in the rural areas and at the municipal seat in order to raise awareness about environmental regulations and to solicit input for the pact. The pact was signed in São Félix in August of 2011, and it became the basis for a post-pact agenda implemented by the commission. Even as the pact was signed, substantial progress had been made on power registration, thanks to the efforts of the Nature Conservancy and the Ministry of Environment in particular. TNC sent one of its most experienced technicians who had worked on the Lucas project to São Félix in order to advance power registration. By November 2011, São Félix had more than 80% of its non-protected areas registered in the environmental registry, which is the priority list requirement. However, the municipality has been unable to reduce deforestation below the 40 kilometers per year, 40 square kilometer per year threshold that is necessary to exit the priority list. The municipal government, landowners, and the Nature Conservancy have advocated to the federal government to make the deforestation threshold for exiting the priority list proportional to the area of the municipality, so that a large municipality like São Félix need not reduce deforestation to the same level as Paragominas, which is a municipality less than a quarter of its size. But they have so far failed to secure this change. Nonetheless, TNC's intervention in São Félix has always been conceived as a pilot project to further policy evolution to serve as a model for application. So as TNC's local manager observes, as environmental compliance evolves, TNC creates pilots like São Félix to support the state in developing policies. And as the president of the Ranchers Union in São Félix says, and he's quoted in a TNC Global Lands report, we can be a model not just for Brazil, but for the world. And this model is based on their large reductions in deforestation, large area power registration, inclusive act process that are being promoted as the São Félix model, perhaps. So after that whirlwind tour, I want to share some analysis and thoughts about what we can learn from following the policy through TNC's municipal environmental governance programs across the Amazon. Obviously, the policy pathway that we've traced here is just one dimension of the development of environmental governance in the Amazon region, but it captures key events and dynamics within more general processes. The first argument that I want to make is against framing environmental governance in terms of soft governance and hard governance. The land-sparing complex that advances green agro-industrial projects exercises authority through the interrelated actions of corporations, NGOs, and multiple levels of government. And so I see that in terms of the Gramscian idea of extended state. I don't think that saying it's state versus non-state governance is the most interesting distinction. Rather than hard versus soft governance, the more interesting tension I think this study illustrates is the relation between coercive and constitutive governance. So coercive governance includes the enforcement of the forest code through the imposition of fines and embargoes by government agencies, but it also includes the imposition of the soy moratorium by multinational corporations and NGOs. Constitutive governance involves the participation by local actors in the development of governance institutions such as PAC, which was originally a voluntary declaratory process, and municipal pacts. I would say there is a dialectical relation between coercive and constitutive processes that produces the governance regime. Frontier governance is actually the expansion of a governance frontier. The governmental order of green agro-industry is a political apparatus that emerges through the interactions of coercive and constitutive processes at particular interconnected spatial and temporal nodes. We can conceptualize each of these municipalities as nodes of policy evolution that become central to the expansion of the governance frontier. And this governance frontier is co-produced with other frontier socioeconomic ecological formations, and it helps to stabilize and regulate those formations. But these dimensions are dynamically interrelated, and they are not always perfectly superimposed in space. The second major argument that I want to make is that each of these nodes becomes a municipal model through what we call in Portuguese the flexibilização, or flexibilization, rendering more flexible, and the legitimation of the governance regime. So the dialectic of coercive and constitutive governance involves the renegotiation of the terms of coercion. In Santarém, TNC's monitoring project allowed for the soy moratorium as a flexibilization or resolution of Greenpeace's blockade of the Parque port. In Lucas, COG flexibilized the slapper to allow landowners to register their properties without being fined. In Paragominas, COG flexibilizes the priority list to avoid a review of municipal land titles. In São Félix, there's been an unsuccessful attempt to flexibilize the priority list further by changing the 40 kilometer square annual deforestation limit to make it proportional to the municipal area. Each successful flexibilization facilitates compliance at a cost of virtual amnesty. It forgoes fines and legitimizes land grabs. At the same time as it transforms illegal deforesters and land grabbers into responsible producers in model municipalities. And this is a point well made by Andreas Azevedo in studying this problem. Model municipalities are thus also crucibles of legitimation. And while I have not gone into detail about the impacts, these governance models tend to consolidate agro-industry while disadvantaging small economies. In sum, the governance frontier in the Amazon develops through the negotiation and contestation of a political legal order that legitimizes, stabilizes, and consolidates an agro-industrial mode of production. Now, that claim has been made before with different framings, but what I hope we're showing with the empirical data from following the policy model, following the model policy, and with our theoretical interpretation, is the specific political geography of this process. So let me conclude with a few questions for future research or questions that we might be able to address within this project. First, the dialectic of coercive and constitutive governance described here is essentially an intra-elite thing, as I've described it. So why do small farmers, for the most part, appear not to have opposed these elite-driven governance models? And I have some intuitions about this, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. And secondly, what are the spatial entanglements of the governance frontier with other frontier dimensions? So for instance, can neoliberal governance precede the establishment of agro-industrial relations? Or can you only have governance on top of agro-industrial base? São Félix remains a critical case here, as this is a node where the governance model is being deployed over high levels of deforestation and less intensive agricultural production. Again, I have some further thoughts, but I'm also so I'll stop there. I'm very much looking forward to your questions and